Why hello, this is Soul with another video, and today I'm going to be covering the Q&A that had just ended with Ian Hazzikostas and Josh Allen, aka Lore. I was going to say Josh Lore, aka Allen. I tend to do that a lot. I don't know why. So I'm going to go over all 19 or 18 of the questions that had gone down. I'm going to start backwards to make things interesting. I'm going to react to them. I'm going to read off the questions, what they were, what the general gist of of how I understood the answers that Ian was giving, and well, give a hopefully short response. So let's just get right on with it. Yeah. Parabutter wrote, the intro quests on the beta are painting the Horde in a negative light. Should I be worried about my faction turning evil? This was kind of a lame way to end it with, I mean, come on, they're asking the game director about a lore-related thing. This would have been a better question to ask if it was Alex Afriasabi that was up here, or inexplicably if it was like Christy Golden that was part of the Q&A. Of course, they wouldn't be able to answer those kinds of things. Those are the kinds of things that you don't really want to spoil. And you can't really spoil in a Q&A. That disturbs, that kind of ruins the whole thing. Given things like, hey, what's the upcoming gameplay that we can expect? Those are more adequate things to answer, so that way we as players can prepare for stuff. We can adjust our class. We can quit the game because we think that this is like doo-doo better. But when it comes to lore, it is kind of a bummer that that Ian was forced to give a non-answer. So bad. Why even have that kind of question here in the first place? Ecoland asked, now that class tier sets are gone, how many appearance sets will there be in a raid per armor type? Just one? The answer was yes. There's going to be a single kind of raid piece of gear per armor type per raid. So as a protection paladin, I'm going to see one plate set per tier, and that's about it. The difference here is that, as Ian was trying to explain, is that there's going to be different places to get different kinds of sets of gear, and he made the example of the first tiers of Warlords of Draenor as well as Legion, where the Emerald Nightmare and the Nighthold raid, they had pretty much the same gear. They were just recolors of the same stuff. In the case of Battle for Azeroth, we can have the expectation that each raid is going to have its unique set. Just like how we're seeing kind of a bleed off here. We're seeing that Warfronts have their own unique set. 3 tiers of them, in fact. And part of me kind of sort of expects that within Warfronts, maybe this first Warfront over in the Stromgarde in the Arathi Highlands, maybe we'll only be able to get that first tier set. And maybe when Warfront number 2 comes out, then we can build up to the second set, and so on and so forth. So this might allude to there only being 3 Warfronts in the Battle for Azeroth, going with the assumption that this type of armor set is only going to be spread out across all the Warfronts. Or we might get a whole bunch more sets as more Warfronts come along, which might be kind of cool, but might be kind of not cool, because that means that between that there's only going to be so many raid sets, but with Warfronts there's going to be that many more Warfront sets. It's kind of weird. Personally, I don't mind this because, just like Ian said, I have plenty of Paladin-esque kinds of sets. I'd like to try something like a little different, and I was talking in last week's weekly about the plate armor set that we're seeing from Uldir, and I like it a lot, mostly because it has a very muted kind of theme to it. It's not flashy, it's not grandiose at all, especially when I compare it to the previous Paladin tier that we saw in Antaurus. I like the set. Other people might disagree entirely, and that's totally fine. But after seeing so many different kinds of Paladin sets, or different kinds of sets that are very class specific, I'll give them, I'll give Blizzard 1 or 2. We've seen this a little bit in like the Trial of the Grand Crusader, or I'm sorry, the Trial of the Crusader raid. I don't mind seeing something like this again happen. Arcarius asks, will the item level / trading restriction for personal loots work mechanically going forward? And I should probably time that with another question. It was at FSYM Hack. They asked, are there any updates regarding loot methods in Biffa? Personal loots will dramatically impact class choice for high-end raiding guilds. So it feels like they're throwing down, they're going all in with personal loots. get mad. Or at least, well, yeah, I guess I'm still a little bit mad and upset about it. I'm still pretty firm on wanting control over my raid. Ian had talked about, hey, there's, it's great for those few guilds that can distribute loot harmoniously and without drama. And while I might not be 100% on that, that's kind of us. That's my guild. That's how we do it. We just kind of put it on group loot and we let people distribute things as they go along, and that's it. I am a fan of personal loot when it first came out, and I still am. So I'm gonna make my team adapt. Let me just speak for me and my guild. We're going to adapt. I'm gonna make them adapt, I guess, because I'm also firm on the belief of because we just do group loot. I tell people in guild, if you want to roll for it, go ahead. There are certain things that I discourage. Like I prefer not to. I prefer to let gear go to mains versus alts, especially like right now with Antaurus when we're bringing alts. Some of us do bring mains, and I try to say, yeah, we should. If you get an upgrade, it should go to the main first because they're on their main, and I'd like these people to complete their sets. Something like that might be a little bit harder though because they're on alt, and so it makes the whole trading restrictions kind of funny. That alludes to like the other question, because at least as of now, there aren't going to be any changes on how trading is going to change in personal loot. So just to clarify, if you've ever seen or have equipped an 895 or I'm sorry, an 885 piece of gear, anything that you see after that will be tradable under the personal loot system, because at one point you had in your head slots an 885 item level thing, so you'll be able to trade everything else that's of a lower item level. But in my situation with bringing both alts and mains, that's going to kind of suck, because there are going to be periods where we're going to see an alt get a piece of gear, and the person on their main is going to be like, oh man, I fucking wanted that, but then they got it. So that perception is there. I'd have to go through like some mental gymnastics to explain to that person, well, it's not that they got it and you didn't. It's more like they got it, you did not get it. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but that's kind of, I can't really explain it too well, but that's kind of the mindset that I have with regards to that, because it's personal loot. It's just you either get it and you don't. And what happens to the other person, that's all on them. If they happen to get it, okay, cool. It's no fault of your own. And even when it was in a group loot setting, I tend to encourage, like if we're doing progression, I always tell people, you can roll for it if it's an upgrade, of course, but don't be an asshole about it. Preferably give it to the person who needs it more. And I follow that thought up with, if you do win it, it's yours to give to that person. And I think that's kind of what's going on here with personal loot, is that it is going to be your loot to give to that person. You're going to feel empowered. Unlike other systems, not what me and my guild do, but other systems like DKP systems, where I guess Ian did make a good point. It's not a very convincing point, but he did make a point saying that, hey, there's that moment of excitement when a piece of loot drops, but then there's that moment of waiting and that moment of because someone else is deciding whether or not you're going to get that piece of loot or whether you earned it. But to conclude, I would still prefer that things like master loot exist, because control, once again, I think people should be empowered to join those kinds of groups or decide to not join those kinds of groups if they don't want to. Next question, Fallon writes, are you guys going to reconsider your stance on Death Knights for allied races that make sense if said Death Knights cannot earn heritage armor? Blizzard's answer was, so far, no, but they do plan on, I don't know if they plan on it, but I guess with every expansion, they revisit that idea of race class combinations. And more exceptional instances such as this with Death Knights and Demon Hunters. Death Knights, I guess the way I'm seeing it, if you want to become a Death Knight or a Demon Hunter as an allied race, it feels like the scenario that gets you started with those races will have to change, or that there'll have to be something brand spanking new to write in order to fit the present day WoW and how that's going to work out. Like, so for Demon Hunters, of course, you can't have a gnome Demon Hunter because lore-wise that definitely did not work at all. However, when it comes to like the present, then we can have like Jace or whatever some of these Demon Hunters are called. They can be like, well, okay, gnome, I guess you really wanted to be a Demon Hunter, so we'll train you, and then you'll go through like some sort of scenario type of system for that, and then you'll start at maybe even like 110 or something like that. That might be kind of cool. Same thing would go for Death Knights. Instead of the narrative where you're at Acheris and you're doing that sort of thing, you're being raised up from some other location from someone else, and it's like, okay, rise champion, you're my bitch now, and or something like that. Or you might work with Bolvar as one of his Death Knights instead. It could go either way. Silver Rest writes, when deciding an allied race, why did you choose Void Elves when High Elves seemed much more of an organic and popular choice? Ho, ho, ho. Oh, man. This was good. Okay, it wasn't good. I'm sure that there are a lot of... I glanced at forums right after the Q&A, and there's already, like, raging going on over on the forums. So, Ian basically said that Blood Elves are High Elves, and that is it. And that if you want to roll as a High Elf, then the Horde is waiting for you. And then you can roleplay yourself into a High Elf. And that's it. You just happen to be a part of the Horde. And I'm behind that. Like I've been saying in forums and in videos and other such things, and I'll say it again now, I've seen plenty of stuff. I've seen plenty of other videos and articles, very expansive articles that cite all sorts of fancy quotes and other references that help to back up the existence of not just a thriving High Elf race, but as a playable one. But I haven't been convinced of it. It just doesn't sell. Just like kind of along the lines of what Ian was saying, it's that there isn't a sense of unity between the remaining High Elves that exists. Those that are, he didn't say this part, this is me, those that are signing up with Alaria and her ilk. So the whatever's remaining of these unaligned High Elves, they're basically going to Alaria, the way that I see it. And the idea of the Silver Covenant being the foundation of an allied race, it hasn't been written. And from the sounds of it, at least with what Ian was going with, it doesn't seem like Blizzard is interested in writing in the Silver Covenant as being a dominant race that is trying to rein in the remaining High Elves. Because to be honest, they should have done that many, many moons ago. Hell, even before, I'd say even before the Burning Crusade. That when Kael'thas decided, hey, we're gonna be Blood Elves now, let's do this, and the Silver Covenants, they decided, hey, no, we want to bring in elves that didn't want to be part of the Horde. If there was something like that, then there would be a much better foundation for creating an idea of a thriving High Elf race, and then an allied race, a playable allied race. It hasn't happened yet, and unfortunately it feels like a too little too late kind of situation where High Elves are simply a dying breed, and those well, are actually by name they're a dying breed, because they still call themselves, they just call themselves Blood Elves now. Like, it would be a great troll by Blizzard if they decided, like if Lorthamar Theron decided, people of Silvermoon, we've called ourselves Blood Elves for this many years to, in mourning for our fallen brethren. That time's over, mourning's done, we're gonna call ourselves High Elves again. Bam! And that's it. That's all that really needs to happen. And I'm sure that would anger tons and tons of players, but, well, that was their answer, and that's how I feel about it. McWillicks writes, with the introduction of War Mode, will there be any incentive to PvP within the main cities, such as Stormwind, Orgrimmar, or etc.? No, or at least there won't be anything additional to add to that, according to Ian. He did want to note that while you're in War Mode, when you are in those main cities, that the sharding that happens, whether you're PvP flagged or not, that doesn't apply in your main city. It's the main city is the main city is the main city, and then whatever sharding that does occur there has to do with either overpopulation or super or severe underpopulation, something like that. But you just don't have to worry about you being separated from your buddies. That seems to be how that's going to work. I'm still wondering, I was really hoping that they would have answered the question about whether or not you'd be able to fly while you're in War Mode. I'm very, very interested in that, and it sucks that they didn't answer that. Bummer. Vidget Gaming writes, will we see smaller power gains in BFA so you won't have to tweak the difficulty of the world and have huge power differences between players in world PvP? This, I think, is the biggest announcement. This I think is the biggest question of the Q&A, because this strongly alludes to the idea that templates are going away. And you know, maybe I should double check on MMO Champion if they are of the same if they are of the same belief. Okay, so MMO Champion nor Wowhead really gave some solid clarification, so I just sent out the tweet to a tweet to Ian's Twitter. We'll see what happens. But at least from the sounds of at least from the context of the Q&A, in the outdoor world, there's going to be a kind of item level scaling between players, where a heavily geared player versus a not very heavily geared player. The heavily geared player is still definitely going to be stronger, but it's not going to be as imbalanced as it is right now in Legion. And at the same time, you'll still be able to use like your trinkets, and your secondaries will still apply. Those things will still apply. It's just not going to be a stat template, and it's not going to be like this unregulated mess where tanks dominate and kill everybody. As for instance PvP, like battlegrounds and arenas and such, I'm just gonna double check. Maybe I'll get an answer while I'm doing this recording, but yeah, nothing to say on that right now. But I'm hoping, because I think that'd be a pretty cool thing if they did do away with the templates altogether. Viva Tempest writes, rated PvP and racials have been a big subject of discussion time after time in relation to balance and value. Are there plans to deactivate those since they cause more frustration than joy in rated PvP? They didn't say that they would go as far as to deactivate them, but instead they're just going to continue tweaking them and adjusting them over time. Someone had asked me early in the stream about the big nerf to Arcane Torrent, that it's not going to do a silence, instead it's going to do a kind of purge mechanic for players that are close to me. Okay, that's kind of cool. Maybe, kind of, sort of. I mean, frankly, I'm going to miss not having Arcane Torrent. Not being able to do that sort of silence is definitely kind of bummer, especially in AoE silence. That's very powerful. As a Blood Elf protection paladin, though, for me, it's not so bad in terms of the PvP. The PvE stance of things. I'll still be able to interrupt people just fine. From a PvP standpoint, it's going to be a little bit more interesting. And at the very least, I'll get less complaints about people rolling Blood Elves because of Arcane Torrent because it's so OP. Blood Guzzler writes, is Ashran being retired in the Battle for Azeroth? And their answer was temporarily, yes. They wanted to deprecate the achievements and make them legacy achievements because I guess over the course of Battle for Azeroth, Ashran will be shut down for maintenance. But in the meantime, they just wanted to make it so that you wouldn't be able to earn those kinds of achievements because you couldn't earn those kinds of achievements, as they explained. And it would feel really bad if there were achievements that you could no longer earn because Ashran is no longer there. That's all they're doing. And then when it comes back, they apparently have the ability to just reactivate those achievements, which is cool. Binary writes, what is the plan for large battlegrounds now that they have been split from the normal battleground queue? So for those who don't know, they're going to do like a large battleground bucket where they're going to have things like Isle of Conquest, Alterac Valley. Those things are going to be there in its own separate mode. So that way you don't have to blacklist you don't have to blacklist battlegrounds anymore. In fact, blacklisting is going to go away. So, boo! I'm not a big fan of Temple of Kathmandu or whatever it's called, but oh well, I guess I'm going back. But at the same time, they have plans. They plan to talk about it. I guess there isn't much to talk about yet, but they mentioned other places like Wintergrasp as well as Tolbarad, and they can possibly add those to this larger, I believe they called it an epic battleground queue. Once they do a little bit of tweaking so that way it's a more friendly and queuable thing to set yourself up for. Rick Ross writes, how will gearing in PvP work in Biffa? Will it be random as it was in Legion, or will we see the return of vendors? So this was a pretty straightforward one. What they're going to, well, I guess they did clarify what's going on. So there's going to be a mix of random rewards as well as things that you work for over the course of a week. So going with the random stuff, it's what you're familiar with. You do rated stuff, arenas, battlegrounds, etc. You get a random strongbox, and then you possibly get cool things out of it, maybe. As for the things that you work for, each week you're going to be presented with, I'm sorry, not each week, I would say like each season you're presented with your set of gear, and each week a new piece of gear is unlocked. So let's pretend, all right, week 1, helmet. You get all the conquest that you need to get that helmet, and then you get it, and then you're pretty much good for the week. Week 2, shoulders appear. So then you work for the shoulders, and then you just kind of work your way up, and once you complete your set of gear, then you move up to a new set, an upgraded set of the previous gear. If you happen to be behind, let's say you're on week 2 and you totally skipped week 1, you'll be able to, I suppose, initiate some sort of catch-up mechanism, or there will be some sort of modifier that maybe lets you get conquest faster, or kind of like with previous iterations of PvP, there won't be a cap. You'll just be able to continually work your way and get that gear as if it's like a prestige. You can just keep working through. Once you get caught up with everyone, then you'll be going at everyone's pace again. Unless you fall behind again, then you could just get caught up. So there's not going to be an instance where you will miss out on gear as long as you're just playing the game normally. There might be random moments of surprise, as they love to call it, where you'll get something cool from a strongbox. But for the most part, you'll still have a set path that you'll be going down automatically. Emo N writes, what kinds of rewards will island expeditions give other than Azerite power? And this one fascinates me because I was actually right. So the idea that Blizzard has in this case is that they want to kind of separate the way that they do certain kinds of rewards, where they used Maw of Souls as a good example of, hey, what's the best way to earn a bunch of artifact power? And funny enough, they're going to call this artifact power now. They just dropped all pretenses. They're going to, what's the best place? What's the best way to get artifact power to up your bad luck protection for getting a legendary, and to get like decent gear, and it's fast, and you can possibly get like a reasonably good time regardless of the difficulty for Mythic Plus. Do Maw of Souls forever. And that was like the most efficient way to play the game during the earliest parts of Legion. So cut to here with Island Expeditions, what they want to do is make Island Expeditions the best, most efficient way to obtain a bunch of Azerite, to obtain a bunch of artifact power. You will be able, from the sounds of it, you will be able to earn AP from other sources, dungeons, raids, and so on and so forth. But if you're like, hey, you know what, I need to do a binge, my shit's like way far behind, I need to hell get caught up, then do a couple of island expeditions. I believe what they were talking about, they said that there's going to be kind of a weekly bucket of, hey, these are the things that you can queue for, and you get like strong random daily rewards out of these, and then after that you get a little bit less, but that seems to be the most efficient way to get Azerite in the game. That's how they're going to do it. As for other rewards, they were really vague about it. I'm guessing they don't have anything planned yet, but they were talking about gear, cosmetics, things like that. I'm hoping for something like that. That'd be pretty cool. I'm also hoping for something kind of along, this is me totally making something up right now, but let's pretend that since you're fighting these different kinds of small factions and other teams, I think it'd be cool if you got like some sort of negative reputation with these people, or like notoriety with those people, with those people, where if you're doing, like, if you do island expeditions like a ton and you get a bunch of negative rep, then you get these notoriety rewards. It would basically be the same thing as rep, but it's just called something different. And then from that you can use, you know, once you get this negative rep with this with these people that you're fighting all the time, then you'll get some sort of reward. You can purchase cosmetics like mounts and other random goodies. SNR writes, will Azerite traits from more lucrative sources, as in mythic raids, alter our playstyle in impactful ways, or are they simply passives with a greater effect than what we've already seen? So I like the answer that Blizzard gave, but it's not enough. So what they had said was, yes, they will alter your gameplay in more impactful ways. The traits that we're seeing right now, like I've been saying a number of times, they're pretty doo-doo. They're very passive. They're not very strong or anything like that. My expectation is that as we go from build to build, raid, dungeon to dungeon, raid to raid, we're going to start seeing what this whole Azerite thing is really going to be about, where we are going to see, according to Blizzard, we're going to see Azerite traits that are of relative equivalence to slightly weaker legendary effects from Legion. And we see like small things like that. Like I saw that at least on these initial rounds of Azerite gear, there is a random there's a bubble that you create for yourself every 30 seconds, which is very reminiscent of the Pride Az neck. So seeing something like that, okay, that's kind of cool. It looks pretty weak right now. My hopes are that at higher and higher item levels, it will in fact become more of a thing where I might be like, oh dude, we're gonna get lots of passive damage for this one. I better put on my Pride Az Azerite gear, so that way I get like that cool passive bubble. That, you know, something like that would be pretty darn cool. They also said that the intention with some of these higher level Azerite traits is that these will alter gameplay, as in you do X ability and it's going to strengthen, you know, ABC ability instead. Some of these aren't really coming to my head right now, but that's the intention, that they do plan on, for the most part, some of these cooler traits are going to be gameplay altering. To the point where you might want to stack a certain kind of trait set, you know, so you can maximize your throughput, your healing, your tanking ability, and what have you. The one thing that I'm still curious about that I wish that I had asked and I did not, is that if every kind of Azerite trait is going to be stackable. So what I mean by that is, are there going to be certain raid pieces of Azerite gear that will give you like a totally unique ability? Maybe not so much an ability, but just a unique trait that you'll only find on that piece of gear. So in other words, it doesn't stack, but at the same time, it's a very powerful it's a very powerful trait, and the intention there isn't to stack these together because you can't, but because there's going to be a certain synergy with, you know, if you get this certain piece and this certain piece and this certain piece, then there's like not exactly a set bonus that you get out of it, but you get a natural synergy that would have a very strong impact on your gameplay as well as your output. I think that'd be pretty cool, and I'm anxious to see what's going to come in future builds. Aethera writes, how will the more casual players deal with the Heart of Azeroth system if they wish to play more than one specialization? This is one of those innocent questions from those who do not look at, you know, MMO Champion and look at all the things that come down the feed, and as irritating as that sometimes can be, I will respect that, because not everyone does read all that stuff or watch all the videos, and that's totally fine. So to clarify for those who aren't sure about it, your Heart of Azeroth level is going to be the same regardless of what your spec is. You're not going to have to switch to each spec like you do with artifact weapons and re-earn a bunch of levels and hope that the catch-up mechanisms are being friendly to you, and otherwise have to even out your specs. That's not going to happen. In fact, you're not even going to see AP items anymore. You're just gonna get stuff, you know. So you open a chest, you get stuff. You kill a boss, you get stuff. And so on and so forth. So I think that this is one of the things that make the Battle for Azeroth a little bit more alt-friendly in comparison to Legion. I mean, heck, overall it's a lot more alt-friendly because you're not gonna have to worry about farming legendaries blindly and just kind of hacking away at everything. There's still things to worry about, such as Titan forging and the potential of the Azerite gear system, where you might think to yourself, oh goodness, there's this set that I want, and now I gotta farm like all these dungeons in a high level Mythic Plus to complete this set. But at the very least, at least you have something in sight. There's an end of the road there once you get that gear, and you know how to walk that road. Unlike Legion legendaries. Eliana writes, currently in beta, you cannot change which traits you've picked on your Azerite gear. Will we be able to change traits, as in make it easier to pick the spec-specific traits? And if so, will it be something that we can do freely? Yes, was their answer. The way that they have it in mind at the moment, which I do not like, but the way they have it in mind is that you need to go somewhere, you pay some gold, and then you can respec your traits on your Azerite gear. It's kind of like how respecing talent was way back in the day, where you do it once, it costs a piddly amount of gold. But if you do it like 11 times a week, 50 times a week, then that gold cost is going to become quite prohibitive. They didn't say how high that gold cost is going to go. And I remember off the top of my head, I think respecing your talent tree back in the day cost upwards of, it was either 50 or 100 gold. It was a lot back in that day. So I imagine that they ought to adjust for inflation in this case. Part of me doesn't like that though. My hopes would have been that this would have been more of a player economy thing rather than a gold sink. That's something that I prefer, but that's my gaming preference. At the same time too, I was at first of the mindset of, you know what, screw it. Well, we should just not allow respecing at all. We should just re-earn the gear that we need. But I can definitely understand the pushback from players to be like, fuck, you're crazy. I ain't gonna farm for 3 sets of the same piece of gear so I can, have it spec the way that I want. And that's totally reasonable. I totally get that. So I'm gonna walk that one back, okay? But Ian did mention that he doesn't want it to feel like so easy to switch that every time we get to a new raid boss, it's like, okay, I'm going to Hearth. Can you summon me back? Because I'm going to respec my Azerite gear. That's something that they want to avoid too. But I don't think gold is the best answer. It just sucks because opening up that possibility, it's my whole thing. Possibility equates to expectation. So if I can go back and respec my stuff, I'm gonna do it, and I'm pretty sure that when I start doing progression raiding, we're gonna get to a boss, we're going to be doing progression stuff, we're going to wipe, and every now and then someone from the team is like, hey, I'm gonna Hearth and respec my Azerite gear, I'm gonna try this loadout instead. That's something that Blizzard is trying to avoid, but at the same time I don't think they can, because they're allowing these kinds of respecs to happen. So I'm not quite sure how to handle that. And it kind of sucks because it does in fact make it feel like, well, Azerite gear is just another set of talent rows that I'm going to be manipulating. The only difference is that I have to go out and get it, which is okay. But being able to switch them out willy-nilly like that, even with a gold cost, I'm not really feeling it. I think of something like transmog when it comes to the possibility of what the cost is of respecing, and maybe there will be some sort of multiplier that goes up. My hope is that the gold cost is just really high. I know it sounds mean because it's like, oh, you're only fine with this because you're rich soul, but I would prefer there to be, I would prefer the practice of respeccing your Azerite all willy-nilly to be very strongly discouraged by Blizzard. It's like, hey, I could respec this thing, but it's going to cost like 2,500 gold because I can't stop. Now, mind you, I don't think I said this before. That cost of respeccing your Azerite gear is going to decay over time, and according to Ian's words, it would decay fairly quickly. I'm hoping that it doesn't decay that quickly, but Blizzard needs to be very, very careful about how they handle this, because if they change this, if they see, oh, everyone's doing this, everyone's switching out and not giving a shit, we need to nerf it, we need to up the cost, people would be pissed. So I think that Blizzard should start off with a really high respec cost, like 1,000 gold or something like that, and then work their way down and make it reasonable. People would still be pissed about it, but I think it's much better than starting low, seeing that players don't care, and then having to raise that up. I think that would be much worse. Lost Derpus writes, with artifact traits going away, how will class design change to fill the void caused by losing these traits? So from Ian's answer to this question came the pretty free admission that, yeah, they fucked up when it comes to the design of classes that were kind of designed around artifacts. And he definitely highlighted demon hunters, because demon hunters, they were basically born with the artifact in their hands. So it's hard to get away from that, because there's no previous iteration of a demon hunter to go on. But Ian did point out their mistake with making it a bit too, it was like falling off a cliff. It's going to feel like falling off a cliff when these artifacts are finally deactivated. Many classes and specs are not going to feel the same at all. Some of them won't be as adversely affected, but it's going to feel different for sure. And this was Blizzard going with their idea of a modular system while preserving a kind of core gameplay set that is inherent with each class. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that each class and spec needs to have its own identity, its own core abilities, its own thing to define itself. From that come extra systems like artifacts, like Azerite gear, and leveling perks, and talents, and etc. And those kinds of things are meant to complement the class. The perception of players right now, after we've been playing these classes in Legion with artifacts, is that we feel very, very dependent on them, and that's very understandable. To a large extent, I feel that way sometimes too. I'm like, oh, my explosive shield, that's gone away. I don't have an Eye of Tyr. Oh, I'm losing some DPS. The idea though was to make it so that without the artifact, I'm still a paladin. I don't lose a sense of who I am as a class. Demon hunters, not so much. Like Ian was saying, that's a bit harder to do. But the intention is to make sure that all the classes feel okay when we go away from these modular systems, because in a couple of years, we're going to leave the Azerite. We might leave the Azerite system behind, or there might be a semblance of it that follows us later, but largely we're going to say goodbye to these things too. What's the state of our classes and specs going to be once those things go away? Will there be something that replaces it? Will any of these Azerite traits become baseline? There's so many questions to ask, but we're not even at this current expansion yet. What's to say is going to happen for the next one? So it kind of sucks, because Blizzard kind of puts himself in a corner in this kind of situation, because we can't help but feel dependent on on these kinds of systems like artifacts, Azerite gear, and so on and so forth, that help to define our class. Because when we lose those things, we lose some of that definition. So how are we as players supposed to feel okay with losing things, only to kind of re-earn them later? It's an interesting conundrum that comes from MMO gameplay in the Blizzard world. But Ian did illustrate pretty accurately. It's like, well, what do you do otherwise? Do you just keep building on these traits and skills and abilities to the point where My Avenger shield isn't just an Avenger shield anymore. It's my Avenger shield that's been enhanced by the artifact, and it's been further enhanced by the Azerite gear, and it's been triply further enhanced by the Mecha rune system, and so on and so forth. So that's when you start to lose the in my opinion, that's where you start to really lose the identity of the class, I think, because you have this base person, this class that you like and love, but then you have so many things that are attached to it. It feels like, here's my risk at making an analogy. It's like you have this car that's nice, but then you have so many freaking stickers and stickers and stuff on it that you don't know what the hell it is anymore, right? Okay, that was a pretty crappy analogy, but that's kind of what I'm going with, so I'm leaving it in. And finally, the last question was the first question. Well, anyway, Thondrak wrote, can we get a proper explanation on why you keep going with the GCD changes despite the absolute majority of the player base being against it? First off, Ian did go on to say, hey, you know what? We did this knowing that the absolute majority of the player base was going to be against it. Or at least, if I go with like the blue post off memory, the players would have very mixed feelings about it, to say the least, right? So first off, the changes are not done. Well, adding things onto the global cooldown, that, at least according to Ian, that is done. But taking things back off of the global cooldown after getting feedback and testing and all that, that hasn't been completed. So thankfully, MMO Champion has a short list of what was said. Heroic Leap, Infernal Strike, Disengage, that is going to go off of the global cooldown in a future build, which I hope is not tomorrow. And Bloodbath, which I believe is a Fury thing. Uh-oh. This is me not knowing my classes. Bloodbath is going to have a damage component attached to it, so it feels like you're actually doing something with that ability when you use it, even though that is still going to be on top of the global. When it comes to going forward with these changes, Ian explained in a very PvE-esque way as to what's going on, which I'm thankful for, because I think there were too many people that were concentrated on the PvP comparisons. And it sounds like, well, it sounds like he rehearsed this answer, or, you know, really had to prepare this answer, because obviously this is the big thing. But the idea that Blizzard and Ian is going for with these GCD changes is that they want to make WoW into a game that measures your skill at the game with making the right decisions, as opposed to simply hitting the right buttons whenever you need them to, because they're always going to be available. You won't have, and you don't really have any choice as to which kinds of decisions do you make. Do you save someone? Do you save yourself? In the current game, you have the agency to do both, which, you know, has its form of skill. But again, that's more of a, you know, quick reaction sort of thing. That's the idea that Ian was going with. Whereas making the right decision, using a certain kind of ability instead, while keeping someone else alive, something like that, that is a better demonstration of skill, according to Ian, according to Blizzard, as they define skill in the world of Warcraft. But at the same time, I also appreciate and understand that there is a certain level of skill, or there's a certain appreciation for being able to just react quickly to situations. And when the game itself doesn't do a great job of reacting to some of those things, that's where players get that sense of the game being slowed down. So my reaction to this is that it's what I said before in my previous video about Protection Paladins. I understand what's going on now, especially with something like this. This kind of reinforces what I was saying earlier. I understand what's going on. I don't like it, but I know that I'll get used to it, because I'm used to making these sorts of decisions in other ways with other abilities that I have. Like, notably, as a Protection Paladin, I sometimes have to choose, you know, who do I bless, or am I throwing down my Consecrate because that thing is running out, or do I throw a Judgment because I need to refresh my Shield with the Righteous, because I need to hit that so I can get my Ladder of the Protector going so I can heal someone, or do I bless someone? Because those are both on the global cooldown, and those kinds of decisions are what make me, I guess, a skilled player at my class. If I didn't have those choices, it's like, okay, cool, you know, it's a different form of skill, but I think it's something that will be continually debated on, like, forever, as to which is the preferred way. And in WoW, we have a little bit of both. You know, there are some things that are on the global, there are some things that are off the global, things that make sense. Being able to disengage while off the global cooldown, that I think makes sense from both a gameplay and a roleplay standpoint. I think hunters should inherently have that skill to kind of John Woo stuff and like bounce around while they're pew-pewing their target. But the reaction to a question like this, it's entirely going to be up to you folks at home. How do you feel about this and all the other things that were asked? Was this Q&A decent? I think it was as decent as the other ones. So I would love to hear your folks' thoughts on the matter. There are bullet points that you can take a look at on MMO Champion as well as Wowhead. If you want to discuss any of the questions and answers here, feel free to leave a little something in a comment below. I always like talking and engaging with people, regardless of what kind of opinion that you have. So I hope you enjoyed this. I tried to be fast. I hope I wasn't too fast, but I think I covered everything that I wanted to cover, especially since the Q&A had just ended a little while ago. So I hope I understood everything the way I should have. So like this video if you enjoyed yourself or if you're otherwise entertained, and please help support the channel the best way you know how. I'll see you for the next thing that I do, but until then, stay safe, stay happy, and as always, stay breezy.